Tua Tagovailoa with some interesting comments about his former head coach versus his new head coach and why he took the leap now into a certain level of football player and got a big contract this offseason. Pitfalls as well, AFC South, NFC South, what those teams need to avoid to have a great, successful 2024 season. All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love our everydayers, and we always appreciate it when you hit that subscribe button. I know a lot of everydayers out there still aren't subscribed, so hit subscribe on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Phenomenally candid comments, Matt, from Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa on the Dad and Lebitard show, and I encourage everyone to go listen to it. I'm not going to play the full clip, but we can really we can get a lot from just the text version of the comments or just the overall idea. And really, Tua didn't pull any punches on his former coach, Brian Flores. And it just like how different it's the human nature of the NFL, Matt. And I know, like, when I was young and I was playing football, I was more like Tua, where it was like a coach just yelling things at you didn't really help me much. I was more like, tell me why I'm doing what I'm doing. If you just bark at me, you're not going to get a lot out of me. And I think a lot of players are different. Some players are just like, snot running out of their face. And they're like, yeah, yell at me. I just want to run through a wall. And I wasn't really wired that way. And I know some of my teammates were, and I know for NFL players, everybody's different. And essentially Tua talked about the contrast of what it was like playing under Brian Flores versus playing under Mike McDaniel and how much confidence he has now versus when he was a younger player. And he looks like a different player. And what I really think about, Matt, is did we get Tua wrong early in his career because he lacked so much confidence? Did we, he's not the tallest guy, and sometimes it looks funky because he's left-handed maybe, and, doesn't have a huge arm, but he's got a pretty good arm. He was there was a tank for Tua. People were like, this is the number one pick in the NFL draft. He was a big-time prospect coming out of Alabama. And by the way, Nick Saban, his college coach, isn't known for being warm and fuzzy all the time.
I was going to start there, yeah.
What did you take away from this? It was it wasn't a good look for Brian Flores and his potential of being a head coach again, or maybe coaching offensive players at all. Maybe he just should, because he's a good defensive coordinator, obviously. And then, you go down the list of thinking about, man, all the Belichick disciples, because Belichick's not warm and fuzzy either, but he's good friends with the guy who was Tua's college coach. And Flores came from that tree. What is the thing that Belichick does that gets through to players that his disciples haven't been able to as head coaches in the NFL? I mean, so many things flowed through my mind when I was listening to Tua talk about this, but the biggest thing was these are human beings in the NFL too. And the best coaches in the NFL are probably going to be able to navigate different personalities and figure out how to get the best out of all their players. Bottom line.
Yeah. And first off, I think Flores, as you mentioned, is an exceptional defensive coordinator. I mean, he's highly aggressive. I always use this stat that the Vikings led the league in 3-man rushes and 6-man rushes. Didn't have a lot of talent, aggressive as could be. I love his style of defense. I also think we need to recognize that he was the head coach in Tank for Tua time in Miami. And basically, from the way I understand it, got fired because he didn't want to lose. That had to be a very strange environment and a very stressful situation for the head coach when ownership's basically telling you, I'm paying you to lose. And that's not the way he's wired, or most coaches are wired. And maybe he took it out on Tua, rightfully or wrongfully. Sounds like more wrongfully. Now, frankly, if I was Tua, I would have never said any of this stuff. Just be like, oh, Coach Flores was fine. Like, what did you gain by saying this?
And to me, what he gained by saying this is now having the confidence to say, screw that guy. You know what I mean?
Like, times have changed. Yeah.
I mean, he clearly did not like Brian Flores. And now he's saying, look, dude, you were wrong. You almost ruined my career. And this is my career.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, you were gone so I could thrive. And like, you could tell there's something deep inside of him, and he is.
Yeah.
And that's what I got from it. He doesn't care about Brian Flores' feelings. And he's also probably fighting back on, like, guess what? Brian Flores didn't care about my career. So why should I care what I'm saying about this dude now? So this felt deeply personal to me.
I 100% agree. And Tua is loved. I mean, and he is apparently a great personality, and people really play hard for him. But I also think there's always two sides of the story. If we were to interview Flores and he was honest, he might be like, Tua's a wuss. He's soft. Toughen up. I mean,
right. He's out speaking of getting people fired. This kid got me fired. They're trying to make me lose games for him. Then he comes in and he sucks. What am I supposed to do? So I'm sure there's the other side of the coin, and I would love to hear the candid conversation there too. And it's okay. Be candid. Let's hear it. Put it out there. Like, and probably Brian Flores is going to need to put something out there because,
I don't know if he'll ever be head guy again. I mean, he kind of got blackballed, obviously, too, after the situation. And then picked up the linebacker coach. And,
for an owner to hire a head coach that's sued a different owner is probably going to be difficult.
Right.
He probably already knows that
might be frowned upon.
Failed, but he's good enough defensive coordinator. He's going to get those jobs continuously, I'm sure. And he is a really good coach. But it's really interesting. That and the proof is in the pudding, at least for Tua. Like, people will be like, oh, he's soft. Well, he's thriving now. So what do you want? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Help your players be better. It's kind of like what, and it takes all kinds. And so if you sometimes you got to be a hard ass, and sometimes you got to know when you need to build confidence in your players. And not everyone's cut out to be a head coach. There's a lot. Brian Flores wouldn't be the only one that's maybe not as good of a head coach. By the way, the Dolphins had a great record under Brian Flores too. So it's not like he was a bad coach. He was a bad match for Tua.
Apparently, yeah. And this is probably a bigger conversation than we have time for, but I wonder, is Belichick going to be the last of the hard asses? The true tough guy, old school, Bear Bryant,
Yeah. Well, I think about, Dan Campbell is kind of a hard ass, but there's like a softness to it.
Good natured.
There's like he'll cry at the podium because he's so worked up because he cares so much.
At least there's a tenderness. I mean, at least there's a human side to him. It's not Tom Landry on the sideline that never even smiles after a touchdown, or you know what I mean, in his fedora, or Bear Bryant, or Chuck Noll. I mean, those guys that, or even Parcells. Lastly, though, and I bring up Steelers a lot because I'm around them, but just being around Tomlin, maybe his greatest strength is I think he knows what button to push for what player. You know what I mean? Like, I can coach this guy hard. I can challenge this guy. This guy might need a hug. You know what I mean? Or I can joke with him. To me, that's what you're looking for at the head guy.
Yeah, and you see Tomlin, you see his facade, you see his face, and you can tell, like, we talk about this where there's a training camp fight, and he's like, break it up, guys. But like behind that, you can tell he really likes seeing his guys want to fight.
Right. There is a hardness to him, right?
There's absolutely a hardness, but he can navigate that. And I think that's what makes a great head coach. And that's why he's been so good at it. And it's not easy to be a head coach. And I couldn't do it. I know that.
And definitely the players have more money, fame, social media, power.
Yeah.
yeah. They're all the same agents. They all know each other. Like, it's not like it used to be.
In a lot of ways, there's probably players that are good NFL players, even great NFL players that in past eras would have flamed out before they even got to the NFL, because you couldn't have feelings in the past. Now you can. Does that make you soft, or are we progressing as a NFL society?
I mean, even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when a player said, I have a mental illness, I'm going to step away from the game. Oh, you're soft. You're toughen up. Right?
Your career's over.
Yeah. Oh, your career's over. Right.
Progress, maybe. I don't know. But
like
Tua clearly has no love lost for his old head coach. And
what's crazy, though, last note is, I mean, coming from someone that's been fired in the league, they could both end up on the Raiders in 6 years from now. You know what I mean? Probably won't, but I mean, like, they could cross paths again.
We don't really talk about Mike McDaniel and all this, but you can't deny the positive vibes that Mike McDaniel brings to everything 100%. He touches, to his team, to his players, to the press conferences.
He couldn't be any more different than Flores, too.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, even their side of the ball that they specialize in, everything. Right?
And there's a confidence to it, though, too. It's not like the Dolphins are some soft team, and there's a softness about it. There's a confidence about Mike McDaniel's team, to me, in the way he operates.
Certainly in terms of, I'm going to design this play and I'm going to shove it down your throat.
And there's a lot of real fake tough guy stuff too, which you can always miss me with that. I think of like Greg Williams, and he's like he's trying to like bribe his players to hurt the other team. It's like, dude, come on, you're an absolute joke. So I'm glad that stuff's out of the league.
Me too.
Next, pitfalls. Every team in the AFC South and the NFC South, what those teams need to avoid to have a successful 2024 season, which is very different for a lot of teams. Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And we talk a lot about FanDuel and why we love FanDuel, and why they are America's #1 sports book, and a very special offer for especially football fans this football season to listen to right now. Because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And all you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sports book. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. AFC South. Let's start with the darlings of the NFL right now, the up-and-coming Houston Texans. What are the pitfalls for Houston, and why should we be skeptical about the never-ending rise of the Houston Texans in 2024, man?
I think this one's obvious, and they look really, really good on paper. I love their quarterback. I love their head coach. I love the Will Anderson addition with Stroud, and I didn't adore their offseason, but they're better now than when we saw them last. They had a ton of O-line injuries. That's unlikely to occur. But I'm going to cite Football Outsiders a couple times. They're now FTN Fantasy, by the way. Football Outsiders does exist. But there's a lot of proof that, and they call it the plexiglass principle. And it's been very, very true. And it holds up time and time again in the NFL. And what it means is when a team takes a huge mother may I step forward, 9 out of 10 times, they don't take another step forward. They hit the plexiglass and bounce back. If you go 5 steps forward, you usually go 1 back, and then maybe the next year you go 2 steps forward to win the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? And they took just a monster step forward. I mean, this time last year, their win total in Vegas was like 4.5 or 5. I mean, they were considered as bad as like the Panthers are right now.
We were thinking about them. I think about the New England Patriots in 2024 a similar way. New head coach. We're like, oh, this is a pretty bad. I mean, they just drafted like a 150-pound wide receiver in Tank Dell. You got Nico Collins, who is a former 3rd-round pick who has never really become a guy. Noah Brown, and you got a rookie quarterback, and a lot of question marks. The rest of the team, like that could go really bad. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, this rookie quarterback's pretty good. Oh, wait a second, Nico Collins looked pretty good. So does Tank Dell. Now you add Stephon Diggs to that. And Will Anderson in year 2, and sometimes it takes pass rushers a couple of years, year 2 and 3. All of a sudden, you see those sack totals really start to rise. And they've added Danielle Hunter to that mix with Will Anderson on the other side.
What can go wrong?
Jimmy Ward. I mean, I love this team so much, so it's hard not to be super excited about where they're at. I like the offseason. I mean,
they even got a playoff win under their belt. Like they've been to big games. But here's the other thing that kind of it goes back to what I was saying, like the plexiglass principle is now you have 5 primetime games and you have more Monday nights on the road when people don't think about this. You get home at like 6 a.m. On a Monday night road trip, you know what I mean? Like things like that. And just a little more attention and no one takes you lightly. And, it's just easier to be the hunter than the huntee.
Absolutely. Expectations now.
Yeah.
Is that playing?
That's the pitfall.
The pitfall. Expectations.
Yep.
Trying to avoid that sophomore slump. And I believe they can do it. But is being just good, maybe a wild card team, maybe you win the division and early exit in the playoffs, is that like a disappointment now?
So, like, if 1 year ago you and I were doing this show and I told you a genie came out of a bottle and told me the Houston Texans are going to be 10-7 in 2024, you'd be like, wow, this team is really going places.
Yeah.
But now if I told you they'd be 10-7, you'd be like, not as good as I thought.
Yeah. They're kind of the same team they were last year.
Right. Maybe a little worse,
How about the where are we at here in the South? Let's go to the Indianapolis Colts next. This is another team that I think there's expectations that next step will be taken. And last year they kind of set some things up. They drafted their rookie quarterback who got hurt in Anthony Richardson, and now it's like year 2. Okay, well, let's see it. We expect to see those results on the field. They've got a ton of athletes everywhere, but who's going to develop? Josh Downs and Michael Pittman and Adonai Mitchell. Are they going to be dynamic, or are they just going to be kind of a pedestrian offense with their, run first quarterback? What's that going to end up looking like? Who's Jonathan Taylor going to be this year? He's going to be that guy that we're drafting 1.1 in our fantasy leagues next year. Can they get enough pass rush on the outside to go with DeForest Buckner on the middle of their defensive line? The rookie Latu need development there. You need development in the back end, young athletic players all over the secondary, Juju Brents and Nick Cross, and the linebackers as well. So to me, it's like, where's the development? Can you finish the development with all the athletes that have been drafted in Indy the last couple of years?
This is a tough one for me because I think their floor is pretty high. Even with a backup quarterback, they were competitive. The O-line was good. The defense isn't great, but it's not bad. They have depth. They have athletes. So I'm going to kind of cheat on this one a little bit, and because it's so easy to say quarterback. But if Richardson has an injury-plagued second season, before you know it, he could be Justin Fields, or you know what I mean? Like, if I just don't know after 2 years, I keep seeing flashes, but this guy can't stay on the field. Where are we as an organization? Can I pick up his 5th-year option? Can I build around him? Do I have to go back to the well? I need the answer. And I'll probably say the same thing about Bryce Young too. Like, I need the answer now.
It's a great way to put it, because I talked about development, and you could say it throughout the roster. You need some answers. You need to know with the who are the players and who are not the players, and hopefully most of them are the players, and none less than their quarterback.
And like, we know Quentin Nelson and Buckner are, but they're now on the back 9.
Exactly. Jacksonville Jaguars. What is the pitfall for the Jacksonville Jaguars to be successful in 2024? Because this is a team that has passed the young rebuild. They got a quarterback that they've already paid. There's expectations here as well.
Another tough one, because I think their front seven's good. I'm a Lawrence believer. I like the additions they made. The O-line is a little creaky to me, and they really had no running game. And I guess that kind of leads me to, if Trevor Lawrence has to be Superman like I thought he had to be last year, that's asking too much. I think the secondary, especially the second corner spot's a little shaky. And this is going to sound rough, and I don't mean it to be, but I don't know if this organization knows how to win. They've had so many bad years, and we can just blame Urban Meyer or whatever. But like, I don't know that they're a winning organization.
They're a weird build, and like it's not like they drafted and developed some quarterback. They had the first pick in the draft for this generational guy that
we all would have taken
in the league,
right?
Drafted in Trevor Lawrence, right? And so, like, how are they building around him? We're still like, Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk. And it's like, okay, they're NFL players, but so Brian Thomas
excites me. Yeah,
he's
yeah.
a little one-dimensional of what he probably will be as far as an outside X receiver downfield sort of a guy. So he's not going to be a 100-catch player most likely, and who knows, maybe he is. But he's an interesting one. How does he develop for that team? But we still shouldn't be like, man, what about Trevor Lawrence's weapons, and what about the offensive line? This is year 5 for him now, or no, year 4.
He's got a huge contract, right? Yeah,
you've had plenty of time to build around him, and those are still the biggest questions.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think Peterson's a good coach, but he's shown signs in Jacksonville of questionable decisions and things.
They were too easy to let him go after winning a Super Bowl in Philadelphia too. So
yeah,
what's going on there?
And I know you have mixed feelings about the GM in Jacksonville.
Oh, they're not mixed. Those feelings,
they're just not good.
About him the way Tua feels about Brian Flores.
Okay, enough said. So I don't trust him to necessarily get it right either.
Tennessee Titans, not a team with expectations, at least on the outside. I'm sure there's more expectations within the building. It looks like DeAndre Hopkins is going to be ready to start the season there. They added Calvin Ridley to go. Their young quarterback, and Will Levis is just developing the young quarterback at this point, the only pitfall there. And unlike the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think they've done a better job. Ironically, Calvin Ridley is the one of the receivers they brought in. But from the offensive line perspective, J.C. Latham, Peter Skoronski, they did everything they could to get the best players they possibly could on that offensive line to go with their young quarterback. So, and I like the way the left side of that line is looking. By the way, just watching a little J.C. Latham in the preseason and hearing him speak a little bit more, and see, I could see why J.C. Latham was really high in a lot of people's draft.
I loved him.
Like who he is.
I thought he was right there with Alt. Yeah.
And he's acclimating to left tackle too.
Okay. So I see this a little different in that I commend them for setting up Levis to win, to succeed. But if he stinks, okay, then we're going to pick the top 5 and we're going to get another one. We don't have that much invested in him.
Right.
That doesn't break my heart if he stinks. It doesn't stunt the whole franchise timeline all that much. I could go sign Dak Prescott or whatever. I mean, I kind of just want to know. However, you kind of alluded to it. They spent a lot of money. A lot of money. Snead and the center, Cushenberry, Ridley, etc. Tyler Boyd. I think they could look at this season and be like, we maxed out our credit cards for good players and treated them like great players.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You did a lot to be mediocre still.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, we won 2 more games, and now we have a lot of bad contracts that these players aren't quite as good as I thought they were. They're not young,
And how's the defense going to come together with a new regime too? Like that, there's still a lot of questions there, especially outside of like Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry coming off the edge. So,
but he's not Nick Bosa. He's okay. Besides Simmons, who's a star.
They did bring in Darius Sneed in the offseason. They brought in a bunch of safeties, Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. We'll see what he looks like there for them.
Like you're paying Sneed like he's a star. That's kind of my point. And maybe he's just good and not the Hall of Famer,
And maybe you're just good enough to not draft high enough to get the next actual star.
You took 1 step forward when a different build would have maybe got you 3 steps forward in a couple of years.
Next, the NFC South. What are the pitfalls? A lot of pitfalls in the South, especially the NFC. So we'll go to the Atlanta Falcons, who are all in under a new regime. Next. Thank you once again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. For your second listen today, how about enjoying Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast or Locked On Dynasty Podcast featuring one Matt Williamson? Get daily insight into the best fantasy strategies so you can go win your leagues this season, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Atlanta Falcons, what are the pitfalls here? They're going all in. They got a veteran quarterback. They got a rookie quarterback. They like their rookie quarterback so much that they don't even need to see him in the preseason anymore, Matt. And by the way, hearing more comments from Raheem Morris, the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, I think he kind of said, "Oh, we've seen all we need to see from from Michael Penix in the first preseason game. I think more of it is just that they come from LA. The Rams don't play in the preseason either. I think this is more of a we despise the preseason, and if you're playing the preseason for the Atlanta Falcons, you probably aren't meaningful because we just don't care about it at all.
Because we have Ram roots, which I can understand. Rams have been
like
successful.
That better than saying, "Oh, our quarterback doesn't need any work." Like I think that's a terrible explanation of it. We hate the preseason. We think it's not valuable. That should be the answer.
So I referenced Football Outsiders, now FTN, and they do their almanac. And in the almanac is projected DVOA for every team's offense and defense. They had the Falcons 32nd in projected DVOA on defense. And that was before Simmons and Judon. But I was a little shocked because they were better than that last year. I mean, but their front seven's still pretty bad. Like, I could see a lot of shootouts in Atlanta. I kind of want fantasy players from Atlanta or playing Atlanta in 35-34 type of games. So I think that's a pitfall, but at least they're addressing it with two guys since those numbers came out.
So I want to stop you right there because that is the exact pitfall I had, and it's the winning the offseason because you get these flash moves and you get a name and you're like, Judon, you got Simmons. Those are familiar names. Those are Pro Bowl players. This is probably going to be really good. And we see it every offseason, and it doesn't mean you're going to be really good. But I think where they have the most to gain is probably just from an offense standpoint, a coaching standpoint. And I have no idea what Zach Robinson, who also comes from the Rams, is he, the next Sean McVay? Who knows? That tree is starting to look pretty good. A lot of success coming from that tree, though. And I do like Raheem Morris quite a bit. So if they got head coach right, and then they got their offensive coordinator right, and you bring in a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, who is going to be a pro if he's healthy, there's tons of weapons. I don't know which one to own in my fantasy team, but someone's going to be valuable, right?
I think. I'm drafting Bijan super high. I'm drafting London high, etc. Lastly, and again, we're trying to look at if you haven't listened to other episodes, we're doing our best to look at glass half empty, or whatever,
right.
Negative way of looking at things. I can see the quarterback thing getting sticky. I'm not saying Penix is Mahomes, but Mahomes' rookie year, everyone in the building knew he was better than Alex Smith and was a special player, but he wasn't going to play. If things go wrong and Cousins looks a little old and he doesn't have the locker room yet because he's new,
it's the two. You have two quarterbacks, you have none.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to start splitting locker rooms,
right.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking around like, why aren't we playing the kid? He's tearing us up in practice, and Kirk looks rickety,
Or Kirk gets hurt, and then it's like Penix isn't quite ready, and it's like, well, why didn't we play the rookie in the preseason?
Right.
Carolina Panthers. What's the pitfall here? That
I think they're in the pit, and they already fell in the pit, and they're climbing out.
Yeah, they're everybody's 32 of 32. They were the worst team in the league last year. I guess the pitfall to avoid here is not learning about where they actually are, not understanding where they are, because I don't.
Better self-evaluation would be starting with ownership, maybe,
Yeah, not finding a new owner is the pitfall.
A little more patience, and I don't think any of us think they're going to be good. Bryce Young's an obvious one, and kind of like the Titan situation, I commend them for putting stuff around him to at least see if he can succeed or not. But at the expense of the defense got, besides Derek Brown, this defense is pretty bad. It got noticeably worse.
Well, they traded away Burns. They did add Jadeveon Clowney, so he might give you 80% of that in the short term. They've got enough talent to be competitive.
Yes.
So that would be the thing is, the pitfall is at least they have their first round pick now. So if it's a total disaster and Bryce Young just turns out like, man, he's just not going to be the guy and we're terrible, that's not the worst thing that could happen unless they go the Daniel Jones New York Giants route and they're, drafting fifth and they're like, oh, we're going to keep going with our quarterback, even though it's pretty clear he's not good. And we don't know anything about Bryce Young. He could be amazing still. We don't know.
He still has a chance to be. Yeah.
I hope he doesn't get ruined, but they shouldn't be just clearly the 32nd best team in the league now. I think they've added enough to at least you think this team should be competitive, right?
I tend to think so. I think the coaching hire was a good one. I think the offense will be like even Deontay Johnson. Like they would have killed for Deontay Johnson last year. There's someone to move the chains.
Xavier Legette, first round pick.
Yeah.
They could have used both those guys last year. And now development of second year guys like Mingo and Obviously, you still have Adam Thielen as the old hat there, but you've got to see some progression in this football team.
So I don't. This isn't lofty, but I don't think the offense will be bottom 5. I don't think it'll be one of the worst offenses in the league, but I think the defense might. But I think if you're the Panthers, you might take that. Like, Bryce Young looks like an NFL quarterback, and we're the 20th best offense this year.
I would absolutely take not being bottom 5, probably, if I'm.
Yeah. Well, of course. Right. Yeah.
Versus what they were last year.
I'm not suggesting they're going to be top 10,
What do we think about the New Orleans Saints going into 2024? This is a team that I think should have rebuilt a couple years ago. They're not quite in the New York Giants category of that. And I'm sorry for the Giants fans because I keep crushing the New York Giants. It feels like for no reason. I'm not even talking about that division right now. But a lot of questionable, like, okay, the Peyton era is over. Let's rebuild this thing. Don't bring in Derek Carr just to be mediocre. But they still have a lot of talent. They still have a lot of veterans that are really good. So does this team, to put it like succinctly for what the pitfall is being average. I want this team to be
the most average, irrelevant.
They won the division, and they're looking really good, or be awful. Just don't be in the middle anymore.
I think they're the most average, irrelevant team in the league. And it's funny, you mentioned Locked On Dynasty. I recorded one this morning just before we hit record, and Kate, who I was on with, said, I think the Saints are the team most likely to fire their coach first. And I thought, yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of like the Flores defensive coordinator, not a head coach conversation, end of an era, brought in a new offensive staff, which I'm excited about. Like, I could see that going that way. But my answer here is offensive line. You're making a right tackle play left. The right tackle situation is bad. The interior's bad. So I think the offensive scheme could be a lot better. Carr could be better, but I don't think they're going to block anybody.
And they're a team that went the opposite of the Falcons. They've played they played maybe their starters in high end backups more than any team in the NFL in week number 2. They were out there a lot into the second half of preseason week number 2. So maybe that's them saying, like, Cameron Jordan out there getting snaps, deep into a week 2 preseason game. It's kind of surprising. So
it is a little surprising.
Yeah, this is a team that probably feels that they need to hit the ground running and win games early in the season. And winning an extra game early in the season can go a long way to win this division potentially.
Mm-hmm. And I do think average is competitive in this division.
That's true, which is the pitfall, I think.
Yeah, right. You just spin your wheels, right? Like the
Buccaneers.
You would probably hate this scenario. Is you win the bad division, you go to the wild card game, get blown out, and now you're picking 20th, and you do it all again next year.
And you're like, oh, let's extend it, Derek Carr.
Yeah, right, and draft another
because it works so good. We won the division, we're division champs. It's kind of like where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are right now, right? Oh, they're in a better spot than the New Orleans Saints are. Is Baker Mayfield their long-term savior? They're going to go win a Super Bowl with him? I don't know. And I do have questions about the defense that is kind of was one of the better defenses in the NFL when Brady was there, and it's kind of fallen off, and there's been some drain there. But you still got Mike Evans on offense. You got Godwin, Tristan Wirfs, big contract. They drafted a potential big-time center in Graham Barton in the first round of the draft. So Baker Mayfield has no excuses on the offensive side of the ball. The pitfall for me is where is this defense right now?
Yeah, and Barton looks great. I mean, he's been one of the best players in the preseason thus far. They did spend a lot of money. You mentioned Wirfs, Winfield, highest paid defensive back in the league, Mayfield, Evans. Like, I thought they were going to lose pieces, and they kept them all, which could have ramifications down the line. I wonder, mine is Canales leaving. He went to the head coach in the rival Panthers. He got an awful lot out of Mayfield. If Mayfield kind of plexiglasses back to what he's been, and even though Barton's there, they don't really have a running game that I trust, or running backs that I trust, or ball carriers that I trust,
On that note, one of our listeners, when we talked about Canales leaving last week on this very podcast, Matt, he said, I don't care about Canales leaving because we could never run the ball under Canales. So I expect the running game to be a lot better this year. Is that a Canales thing, or is that a talent at running back thing?
I think it's more of a ball carrier, interior line thing.
They didn't change the ball carrier, but they did draft the first round center.
Which is great. Yeah.
And, Rashad White is just kind of a guy. And, he had he's kind of a volume runner, right?
Good receiver, better
Yeah.
for fantasy in the real world. I'm not a grinder,
Ideally, a back an RB2 where you can run the ball with him and he can catch the ball out of the backfield, third down type of a guy. And who knows, maybe fourth rounder Bucky Irving shows that he's the better back in Tampa. But yeah, I tend to not put that all on Canales.
No, I think Canales got a lot more out of Mike Evans, more out of Baker Mayfield than other people have in the past. I think he's a big loss.
There you go. What do you guys think? What are your pitfalls for the teams in the AFC South, the NFC South? And you know what? It's already that time of the week. Tomorrow's Wednesday mailbag episode. So get those questions into us at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter, or drop a question in the YouTube comments. Make sure you subscribe while you're there, or subscribe everywhere you listen to this podcast. Matt and I back tomorrow. Peacock and Williamson.